First of all, an apology. I'm actually not meant to be here. Peter Winters, who's the founder of our company, was meant to fly in from Canada, but as you can see, due to the very unpronounceable Icelandic volcano, I'm here in his stead. So be gentle with me and I'll see if I can get on with the presentation. Right, so this presentation is about challenging your assumptions on how to market a low-carbon economy. We've taken together 5 top tips, as we've said, and it's based on international primary research data that we've put together and also conversations we've had over the last year or so with clients, governmental organisations, private businesses, public bodies, etc. And we want to basically challenge some standard assumptions that people make and hopefully help you market your low-carbon product. The 5 tips are: think of public interest in climate change as being a niche. Don't underestimate the emotional attachment that people have to it, even though it is a niche. Provide an integrated value proposition. Third, consider existing high-carbon attachments. This is all about brand equity and the challenges that you'll face and the things that you have to overcome. Think about be wary of the fact that the active low-carbon consumer varies by industry sector. And finally, in communications, think about metaphors and think about the appropriate metaphors you use. A little bit more about the survey. The survey is something that's fully owned by our company, Haddock Research and Branding. It's an international survey monitor. We tried to have a complete holistic view of climate change, people's interactions with it, and how that impacts low-carbon products, propositions, and the low-carbon economy. We've looked at an enormous amount of different facets, and we brought that on to bear to how looking at different products and propositions. First of all, some information, a bit more information about the survey itself. As I said, it was a very broad-ranging questionnaire. We looked at things like how many cars people have, how much they drive, how many children in the household, their attitudes, their beliefs, their flying behaviour, their awareness and likelihood to install products and products. We also looked at inviting people, people invited, we invited via an online invitation. We made sure that people didn't know that the survey was about climate change. They were not warned in any way that the survey was about climate change. Also, what we did is, within the survey, we made sure that climate change and the words low carbon were as far into the survey as possible so that we can make sure that responses we got were as truthful and unbiased as possible. The first wave of the survey was fielded at the end of 2008, with future waves later this year. It was conducted online using nationally representative sample sets with over 1,000 people in each country. The 3 countries in the first wave are Canada, England and the USA. The results are available in 14 different section reports, each focusing on a different subject matter. And in the future we hope that we're going to be rolling this out on a regular basis, taking in all the major countries of the world. So the first point, think about public interest in climate change as being a niche. The assumption we're trying to challenge here is regarding the fact that people think that climate change is low down on the public's list of priorities. And the sort of information you see that will back this up is, for example, like this. This is a survey conducted by the Pew Center in America in January this year, and it's a pretty long list. And as you can see, that dealing with global warming is right at the bottom of the American population's thoughts. And here's some similar data from the Department of Transport survey conducted in January this year. As you can see, climate change is right below crime, immigration and health. And the question here was, what is the most important issue facing Britain? Now, the problem with a survey such as this is when you ask people about what is the most important issue, you marginalise other issues that are also apparent in their mind. And also, it tells you nothing about the intensity of people's feelings and associations with the subject matter that's been discussed. To draw a parallel, we can look at the proportion of people who are passionate about particular sports. Part of our survey data included people's passions and pastimes. These weren't just things that people watched on the TV. These are things that people went out and did actively, or they actively went out to watch and take part in. You can see here that football, for example, 37% of the population are passionate about football, 20% about rugby, and 30% about gardening. If you look at rugby, you can see that only 5% are exclusively passionate about rugby, and that's akin to talking about climate change being the most important facet. So it doesn't actually talk about the overall picture, it marginalises it out. And if you really think that that means that people are only moderately interested in climate change, or only moderately interested, in this case, about gardening and football, and marginally interested about rugby, you should go down to Twickenham during the Six Nations International and look at how people actually respond to the rugby match that's being played. There is an emotional association with climate change. People are passionate about it, and they are involved. And indeed, one of the things that we found, and is pretty apparent, is society is very divided about their passions and pursuits regarding climate change. So one of the things we've done within the survey is we built an attitudinal segmentation model. What's important about this is the segmentation model didn't include any other green criteria, it didn't include any beliefs about recycling, it was only questions about climate change, it didn't include any social demographic data. And we created a threefold segmentation model, the first of those segments being climate citizens, or we call them climate citizens. And you can see here of the total data set, that's about a third of the sample. They believe that climate change is caused by human activity, they believe that it is a serious threat, they believe that we should focus we're dealing with it now. There is some variability in personal interest in climate change and how much climate change impacts the decisions of their life. But it must be said, for these last two categories, on average, the impact that this has is much higher than for the other two groups I'm about to talk about. The next group, mild greens, as the name suggests, are people who are less involved with climate change. There's some within the group, there's disagreement about whether they actually believe climate change is caused by mankind or whether it's actually caused by natural causes, and probably it's actually the same within the individuals themselves. They're unsure. Climate change is seen as one of a number of serious threats, and it's most likely that people believe that climate change should be handled by balancing changing things now and if and when things actually do occur. They feel they know a reasonable amount about climate change, and it sometimes is a consideration in their decision-making process. The final group is skeptics and uninvolved, about a quarter, and although about a half of them actually think that climate change is changing, or the climate is changing, very few of them think that it is down to human activity. They don't believe that climate change is a serious threat. They do not believe that we should focus on dealing with climate change now. They think they've got knowledge about climate change, but then equally a lot of them don't have any knowledge at all, and climate change has very little or no impact on the decisions they make in their lives. So as you can see, society is clearly quite divided. Here's just a quick chart to show you the difference between the countries. Canada, as you can see, is a little bit more progressive in its stance on climate change. The Americans less so. But what's relevant about this chart is when you see surveys that compare different nationalities and their attitudes towards climate change, we shouldn't be treating nationalities as being homogenous masses. They are divided across the way. And also what's interesting is looking at the different nationalities, the climate citizens and mild greens and skeptics all respond in similar ways to low carbon products, propositions, etc. There are, of course, some cultural differences, which I will highlight in a bit. So, the second point, provide an integrated value proposition. The main assumption that we're challenging here is the fact that people only ask about price and reliability. Environmental benefits are a fuzzy extra. It's something that you tag on at the end and you hope that people will pick up on. If that's the case, where does the emotion come into it? But how can we measure the emotion and the attachments people have to climate change? To explain how we've measured this, I just need to explain a target group that we've identified within the survey. We did a product concept test of a microgeneration prototype which at the time hadn't come to market. It's now starting to come to market. We positioned the product concept as being purely on its environmental benefits. Sorry, not environmental benefits, purely on its energy-saving benefits. There were no environmental benefits mentioned whatsoever. There was no brand positioning, there was no mention of climate change, there was no mention of low carbon. We then asked people whether they found it very appealing or would they be likely to install it. And the people who said they found it very appealing and very likely to install the product, we called enthusiasts for the product. And remember, these are people who are enthusiasts based purely on its energy efficiency, not on its environmental benefits. We then conducted some analysis called shade analysis. This is a statistical piece of analysis which basically looks at, well, you can feed in any criteria that you have data available for, and you can see whether it's likely that they're called predictor variables. Basically, you can see whether the variables are more likely to bring out the test result, in this case, the fact that someone is an enthusiast for the product. And this is a bit of a tongue twister, but each of the branchings you see here effectively are statistically significant at the 95% level of confidence. We fed into this all sorts of socio-demographic data. We looked at age, income, regional distribution, education, political allegiance. We looked at other target groups we had within our survey data, and we also looked at the three-way attitudinal segmentation model. The only thing that came up as being statistically significant as determining whether someone would be an enthusiast for the product was whether they were a climate citizen or not. As you can see here, 25% of climate citizens, as opposed to 17% of the whole population, were enthusiasts for the products, and 13% of everybody else were enthusiasts. So it means that effectively, within climate citizens, you're twice as likely to be an enthusiast for the product. And if you recall that the product was not positioned in any way on its environmental benefits, it shows that clearly people's unconscious attachments to climate change, the emotional attachment they've already made, is driving their interest in the energy efficiency of this product. But this isn't actually enough. The emotional desire that you build at the beginning is just one aspect of the integrated challenge for any low-carbon proposition. You need to have the initial desire. This could be to do with climate change, but it could also be to do with some other aspect, some aesthetic or visceral aspect. You then need to position it so that it makes sense for the person to buy. This is something that will be at the point of purchase. Is it affordable? Does it make sense for them to buy? It could fit. This is probably a rational decision, but it could fit in with their lifestyle, their behavior, etc. You then need to develop the post-purchase reflection. This is a rational decision-making process. This is based really on whether people feel good about buying it after they've bought it, and whether they get a kickback effectively once they have the product. This could be to do with the energy efficiency and saving money over the long-term period. If we consider two low-carbon marketing campaigns or marketing tools that we have shown on the screen here, first is the A to G scale. The A to G scale meets all three of these criteria quite well. If you think about it, when people see the A to G scale, they know about the environmental benefits of the product, and they buy into the idea of it, and they're more likely to be enticed into buying it. There then is the point of purchase reflection of whether they want to buy it and whether it's going to save them money over the long term. And then over the long term of having a product, they feel rewarded for the fact that they have saved money. And indeed, if it's a product that, for example, is a high quality product or an expensive product like a house or a home that they may want to sell on, the chances are they're also going to get a kickback in terms of the resale value of the product is reflected in the good scoring of the A score within the A to G scale. If you look at carbon labelling, which is a relatively new new marketing tool, and it's a very impressive tool in that it attempts to reassure the consumer that effectively the manufacturer has actually looked at the carbon footprint of the product, has measured it, and is committed to reducing this. And this is actually, it's quite impressive that they can do this, but does it actually fulfill all three of those criteria for the purchaser? Certainly it will appeal to the first point, which is the emotional attachment that someone may have, but does it actually give them a kickback at the point of sale? There may even be scepticism, they may even be concerned that the product is more expensive because of the fact that the carbon labelling has gone on. This is actually probably not the case, because it should be the case that due to the fact that the carbon footprint has been identified and has been reduced, there may even be a cost saving on behalf of the manufacturer. And also on the long-term scale, is there a kickback to the consumer? Do they feel a rational kickback from this? Is there another way that this could be fostered? I mean, one of the suggestions that a company called Zero Footprint's come up with is that there should be green credits, so that if you buy a product with carbon labelling attached, you should then be given a green credit scheme and rewarded for your purchase as a consequence. The third point is regarding consider existing high carbon attachments. The standard assumption is that people will switch to newer, cleaner technologies because they're better. And no doubt there are people around this hall at the moment who get frustrated by the fact that they have some amazing energy-saving and money-saving product and people aren't buying it, and they don't understand why they're not buying it. It may be to do with inertia, it may be to do with the initial cost, but it may also be to do with people's brand attachments to previous high-carbon products and propositions, and this needs to be overcome. You need to consider the challenges that you're facing. If we consider coal, this is probably, well, clearly very high carbon by its definition, and couldn't be more challenging in terms of its environmental impacts. But coal, a lot of people feel good about coal, and it's a similar story with other high carbon products. And indeed, here's some advertising for a company that shipped coal around the world. I think it's taken from National Geographic, if I remember rightly. And you can see here, well, you probably can't see in the small print, but the small print goes on about how coal turns a house into a home. And the tagline here is that coal brings value to life. And here is a restaurant that uses the positive associations with coal. They clearly think that the naming the restaurant of coal will entice people into the restaurant, and they're using the positive association people have with coal. So how can we measure this? Well, this is something we actually did. What we did is we took the word coal within the survey, we displayed it using a tachyscopic display, did a 2-second display much like this, and we asked people to record their top-of-mind thoughts. Literally, we told them within the text on the survey, we told them there were no right or wrong answers. They also didn't even have to make a response. We just wanted them to write down their top-of-mind associations with coal. We then represented coal. After we represented coal, we presented them with a long list of emotional states. And they were positive, negative, ambivalent emotional states. And they could choose up to 3 emotions that they felt that coal evoked within them, or they were feeling at that time looking at the image. Having done that, we then categorized all of the top-of-mind associations. And you can see here that the predominant association people have with coal is of warmth. About a half of the sample, half of the respondents in England actually feel that coal makes them feel warmth, or they felt warmth. And only 3% actually stated climate change. Only 3% has thought of coal as being associated with climate change. We then coupled all of the emotional responses that people felt, or all the emotions they picked out of the list, with any of these top-of-mind associations. And I've highlighted here all of the positive emotions that people have. And what's remarkable is that you can see of the 3% who actually think about coal as being associated with climate change or fossil fuels or non-renewable, 16% of them still feel a warm glow when they think of coal. And of the people in the category who said that coal reminded them of bad, black or death, a quarter said warm glow, and a fifth felt nostalgic about it. So there are still very strong emotional associations with coal, even though the top of mind, they're thinking, well, actually, that isn't that great. And this is the sort of emotional association anyone marketing a low-carbon product needs to overcome. Think about the existing brand equity that the high-carbon products that you're trying to compete against has. We've actually put an advert together regarding this. This will appear in the next edition of Sustainable Business magazine. And you can see here we're challenging the assumption. Coal turns into homes. Can your low-carbon product do that? Apologies, I think we've taken a little bit of artistic license because it probably would in that fireplace. But the message and the theme is there. And also, one of the things I'd like to say about this advert is we've actually set up a blog site. We'd like to get people commenting on this. It's called analysisnotassumptions.com. We've actually gone into quite big detail. You'll see on the site where we explain all of the points that are in the adverts listed. And we'd love you to comment on this. We'd love to get a two-way dialogue going, get other people's thoughts and opinions on the subject matters that we're going to raise over the next 12 months in various magazines. The fourth point is that the active low-carbon consumer varies by industry sector. Basically, this means there is no one-size-fits-all for a low-carbon consumer. Don't assume they're all the same. For example, different demographics involved. We know for a fact that the target market, for example, for a low carbon, or the most likely person who's going to low energy washing machines or low temperature washing products, etc., is an older lady. And for renewable energy solutions, low carbon target market would be young men with children, dads, effectively. And for telepresence or video conferencing solutions, it is the affluent business traveller. Obviously, each of these sections have got completely different concerns, behaviours, and inherent facets about them that you need to consider when marketing to these people. You also need to consider the contextual incentives to resist change. If you're trying to produce a home boiler system, does a high proportion of your target market already have Argas or Rayburns in the house and they love them, and how are you going to overcome that factor? If you're looking at sustainable transport, for example, what amenities are actually available to the individual? Can they even engage with the sustainable or low carbon transport solutions you're trying to put across? And in trying to convince people to move away from flying, how can people get away from this when they already, what attachments they already have there? You have to overcome this, and I'll just explain this a little bit further by looking at some actual primary data we have. We asked people about whether they were supported the idea of increased taxes on flying, and we divided them into flyers, people who flew at least once a year, and non-flyers who flew less than that. And then we subdivided that by the attitude or segmentation model of climate citizens, mild greens, and skeptics uninvolved. As you can see, the non-flyers, who as climate citizens are much more likely to support the idea of increased taxes on flying, whereas those people who are climate citizens who still fly a lot and are attached to the concept of flying are much less likely to support it. It may seem like an obvious fact, but it means that it's similar in other industry sectors where you have to consider the contextual incentives to resist change. And a way of summarising this would be to create a box like we have here, where you have the strong incentive to resist change and the weak incentive to resist change. As you can see in the top right-hand corner, you're going to have the strong supporters for your low-carbon product, proposition, concept, etc. They're the climate citizens who've got very little reason not to change. At the bottom left-hand side, you've got those who are the strong resistors, who are the skeptics uninvolved, so you've got a strong incentive not to change or to resist the change. And then an interesting group are the people in the top left-hand corner who'd be in a conflicted or ambivalent position because they want to change, but they've got a strong incentive not to change. And this could be, if you think back to the chart previously, these would be those people who are climate citizens who are flying, for example. And these could be a target market in all industry sectors, if you use this sort of analysis, for novel products. These people have an unmet need. This is a typical marketing term, but they have an unmet need for something else. And if you think about the flyers who are climate citizens, these are people who must be ripe for the picking for solutions such as telepresence or video conferencing, or indeed effective carbon offset schemes to offset the fact that they are doing so much flying. The final point is thinking about communications, using the correct metaphors. Metaphors are very powerful in communicating, obviously, with people, but you need to target them as appropriately. Using imagery, typically companies, and I've seen it again in this hall here over the last 2 days, typically people use imagery of beautiful nature or polar bears or beautiful fields, etc. And is that necessarily the correct sort of imagery to be using? Much like we did for the previous example with the enthusiast for a target for the microgeneration product, we also tested various different branding concepts. We looked at 6 different branding concepts. One of them here is that of beautiful nature. And we fed in all of the same demographic details, and again we got a tree here. This is probably the least complicated of the trees that we've created. But again, all of the branchings are statistically significant at 95% level of confidence. And you can see here that being a female climate citizen means you're more likely to engage with beautiful nature, and those least likely to engage with this idea are Americans who are skeptics and uninvolved. Another thing you need to consider is cultural cues or other facets. So, for example, here we're looking at passions again. This is Canadian data, but there's a similar situation in the UK and America. You can see here that what we've done is we've just netted. This isn't actually the numbers of people who are passionate about. This is just the difference between climate citizens and skeptics and uninvolved. And you can see that the climate citizens are actually much more engaged in nature and reflective pastimes and active pastimes, whereas skeptics and uninvolved are much more interested in motorsports or things that are typically passive. And again, we've got an advert that challenges this assumption, and this is actually in the current edition of Sustainable Business, so you can see it if you pick up a copy at the front. And it basically says, is there something wrong with this picture? The more sort of graphically aware of you will probably say, well, yeah, the first thing wrong with this picture is that it actually looks like it's a Photoshop composite. But putting that aside, what's wrong with this picture is this sort of imagery will only resonate with certain people. And are those the people that you're actually trying to target with your low-carbon product or proposition? You have to bear this in mind. Looking at cultural cues, and this is something quite strange that we discovered, it seems that in Canada there's a particular passion for motorbikes. And within Canadian men, there is a particular passion for skeptics for motorbikes. You can see here that within skeptics in Canada, they're 10 times more likely, or 10 times higher, a larger proportion of skeptics are involved with motorbikes than climate citizens. And rather interestingly, Marcel Coutu, who I hope I pronounced correctly, who is the president of the Canadian Oil Sands Trust, is a pundit. He writes for both the Globe and the Mail, two of the leading papers in Canada. And he writes on two topic matters. One is motorbiking, and the other, not surprisingly, is the tar sand situation. And perhaps he's communicating directly with this subsection of the society over there. And possibly a simile we have in this country would be someone like Jeremy Clarkson, who is a petrol head and who constantly goes on with his climate skepticism and no doubt is talking directly to the people who view his show. Interestingly, thinking about the comment I made earlier about brand equity, Jeremy Clarkson is also a twitcher or a bird watcher in his spare time. It's how he relaxes, according to his wife. And obviously, his attachment to cars and all things petrol overrides his love of nature and the fact that the thing that he finds is the most relaxing in his pastime. And it actually overrides that. So not only is Jeremy Clarkson a good example because he's talking directly to a subset of society, but also he's got a conflicting situation within himself. And then the final point about using metaphors and communication messaging is regarding the emotions that people are associated. Now, we did a similar test on the words climate change as we did with coal. This slightly different layout of this picture, but effectively you have the top-of-mind associations at the top of the slide, categorized into 3 categorizations. There were other subcategories as well, but these are the meta categories at the top, with acceptance, non-emotional, and denial disbelief. You can see that some of the associations, we've written down some of the verbatim associations here. So climate change is happening, it's a huge concern for acceptance. Amazingly, someone wrote winter is coming when they thought about climate change, so they're completely uninvolved in it. No, that's why we put them in the non-emotional category. And then you get people coming out with comments like, what a load of rubbish, ho-hum, here we go again. And I can tell you some of the responses were incredibly vitriolic and they can't really be repeated in a public forum like this. But what's interesting is that if you then look at the emotional feelings or the emotions that were evoked by climate change, this was exactly the same list that was presented to people as was presented with coal. And you can see here that the predominant feeling that people have with climate change is negative. For those who are concerned or accept that climate change is happening, you've got worried, annoyed, nervous, sad, unhappy, depressed, angry. For those who are in the middle faction where they're non-emotional, unsure, they say annoyed, worried. Admittedly, some of them say interested. Then within denial and disbelief, you have annoyed, bored, angry, or unamused. Predominantly, this is negative. And this, to me, certainly says that we need to reframe our communications regarding climate change and low-carbon products to be more positive, something that will enable the consumer to feel better about themselves. And also, we need to stop scaring people. We need to start moving beyond that. And a slightly fatuous end slide here is that we need to bling up climate change. We need to make it something a little bit more sexy. Maybe not sexy, but we need to bling it up. We need to make it positive, basically. So to summarize, think about public interest in climate change as being a niche. Don't underestimate the emotional involvement people have within it, and it is a niche brand within itself. Provide an integrated value proposition. Think about all the different facets and make sure you appeal to the emotional side of people before they try to make the purchase. Consider the existing high carbon attachments. These are things you've got to overcome. Also, be wary about the fact that the low carbon consumer varies by industry sector. There isn't a one-size-fits-all green consumer. They are different. They have different incentives to resist or to change, and they will also have different internal behaviours, etc. And in communications, think about the metaphors you use. Make sure you use the right metaphors and communication messages, and make sure that they're positive. Finally, if you want any more information, we've got loads of information on our website. There's articles, there's free summary reports. You can get free summaries of all of our reports on our website. There's even our reports to buy if you want to go out and buy the reports. Also, do visit the blog site analysisnotassumptions.com. We'd love to hear people's thoughts and comments about some of the advert concepts we're coming up with. We've also put together a microsite which has actually only gone live yesterday called lowcarbonmarketing.com, where we'll be hosting, for example, various different webinars and video presentations. There'll be a version of this presentation that will be available for free for the rest of this month. You have to register, but it's completely free. After that, there'll be a very small fee to pay. So if you want to see this again and take the details in more depth, please do register now. We're also now writing a monthly column for Sustainable Business magazine called Market Intelligence. The first version of that is actually in this month's edition. And anyone who is a Sustainable Business subscriber will get a 15% discount from our reports, and they're going to be available from our website and also from the soon-to-be-launched Sustainable Business website. So that is my talk in a nutshell. That's the whole lot. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah? I can't hear, sorry. Okay.
Do you have any examples of companies who have successfully run marketing campaigns along these principles that you're suggesting? You know, not emphasizing climate change, but more emotive elements?
I don't actually in that sense. We're starting to work with people now. We've only been going as a company for about 2 years now. We spent the first year analysing the data we had, and it's only now that we're going out and speaking to people. Hopefully in a year's time I'll be able to say to you, yes we do, and I'll be back here talking about how people have successfully done just that thing. Anyone else? Okay. If anyone does want to grab me afterwards, I am going to be lurking around here. I'll probably be over in the Sustainable Business VIP area. Do come and grab me. Oh, sorry.
Hi, my name is Doug Smith. I'm from Camco. My question is, do you find that your clients also want the carbon footprint of their products assessing, either following your analysis or as part of it?
Well, that's not something we deal with. We're dealing more with the high-end marketing, and we're a market research company, and we look basically at the marketing and branding. But certainly, yes, the carbon footprint is a very important part of the value mix, yes. Okay.
Hi, I'm Nina from Business Link. I was just wondering, is there a environmental label or brand that you find that people tend to respond best to? Like the eco label or the carbon footprinting?
Well, as in something like carbon labelling,
yeah.
etc. Well, I think actually, yes. Well, the A to G scale is, without question, from the data that we have, is the one that most people are aware of and responded to. I think it's about 72% of people were aware of it, and about 47% of people said it had impacted their behaviour. And then with climate citizens, that went up to about 60% of climate citizens it impacted their behaviour. So that's, at the moment, is the predominant one. At the time we ran the first wave of the survey, very few people knew about carbon labelling. It was only about 2% of the whole survey group. Hopefully, the next wave of the survey will tell us a very different picture, because there's been quite a lot of promotional activity in that area.
Over there had a question. He maybe.
Okay, I'll make my way over.
Anyone? Was there? I think no. Okay. Yeah. I think there's one gentleman over here.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
You've done a lot of work on the climate change and low carbon issues. Have you also tackled other environmental issues like recycling and things like that?
No, we haven't. We're focusing purely on, at this stage, we're focused purely on low carbon issues. The other thing is I can only show you data that we have that we own ourselves. This is syndicated data that's available to everyone. We are working with other organisations, but it's not available for public consumption at this stage. So I can't respond to that one, but no, not that I can tell you about. Okay. But if you want some research done, I'd be very happy to do it for you.
Hello, Roger Ryan from 5 Media. Can you think of one sector that's got its act together on this marketing front? One particular industry or sector you think is doing its best and perhaps leading the way?
I can't particularly. I mean, I can think of particular examples. I mean, obviously, someone like Marks and Spencer's are putting an amazing proposition together, but then that's across a whole range of things. It's not just to do with climate change, it's the environmental and it's the social responsibility. Can I think of one particular industry sector? No, not at the moment, not at the top of my head, sorry. Anyone else? Okay, well, I think I'm happy to close there. If anyone does want to grab me, please do. I'll be over in the VIP area. Thank you very much.